First, though, joining us from Washington, Representative John Delaney, Senior Minority Whip and member of the Financial Services Committee. He will be with us in just a minute. First, though, we're going to start with Representative Scott Garrett, also a member of the Financial Services Committee. What did you, last night, the things that you did like and the things you didn't like, Scott?
Yeah, well, so I think the president hit on all the right notes, if you will, at least what his polling would tell him what the American public would want to hear. For example, he said he wants to reach across the aisle and be bipartisan. But on the other hand, he said he sort of threatened Republicans if we don't do what he says, he's going to do it anyway. And he said that he wants to make government smarter, not bigger, on the one hand, which the public wants to hear. But then on the other hand, he talked about raising taxes on the economy and making government spend more money. So he touched on all the right notes. He talked about streamlining and making it more efficient on the one hand. But then on the other hand, you know, of course, he continues to push with his 2,000-page Dodd-Frank, 400 regulations that are coming out on it. So he hits the right notes, but his reality just never measures up to what his rhetoric is all about.
Congressman Delaney, one thing that is bipartisan, I think, that, and we've been talking about hammering this again and again, is that we want growth. Both sides want growth. And I would even say it's bipartisan that we really want growth in the private sector to add jobs. Nobody, you know, we like, even you guys, the government can do good things, but you don't necessarily want to really grow it as quickly as the private sector. Is that right? Did you hear things that will accomplish that in the end last night?
Well, I think for the economy to grow, we have to be more competitive as a country. So I think the president touched on several things that will make the country more competitive. He touched on immigration, obviously, which there seems to be very broad support, finally, for comprehensive immigration reform. That will help the country grow. He talked a lot about education and how there's a very significant correlation between someone's ability to get a job and having a good education and workforce training and investing in early childhood education. And all of those investments have to do with competitiveness and growth. And he talked a lot about energy policy, and he talked a lot about keeping energy prices low. And, you know, two of the most important numbers for an economy to grow are the cost of money and the cost of energy. So I think his emphasis on energy was also very much a pro-growth message. So I heard, you know, from the perspective of overall U.S. competitiveness, I heard some very good things in his speech last night.
So if you were a business owner, small business owner, or even a person, a CEO, a large business owner, you felt like he extended an olive branch to your efforts into the private sector?
Yeah, I think people who run companies, and I ran a business before coming to Congress, people who run companies care about two things. As I said, they care about competitiveness, both their own competitiveness and the country's overall competitiveness, and they care about the fiscal trajectory of the country. I think he clearly made very strong points on our overall competitiveness. And as it relates to the fiscal trajectory, I don't think we were able to get into many details, obviously, in the speech, but the president talked about why that's important and talked about...
More so than in the first term, Congressman Delaney? Because I know you've heard businesses complaining about uncertainty and complaining about that the private sector hasn't really been embraced or treated that well. So you would say it's different than what we saw. He has tacked to where he is now more, I don't know, positive about the private sector? You saw that?
You know, he touched on public-private partnerships last night. I thought that was positive. I thought last night's speech was very positive about the private sector. I mean, look, the private sector creates jobs. Government doesn't create jobs. What government does is level the playing field, make it fair, and make certain investments that only government can make. And I think if you just analyze the president's speech against that backdrop, if you will, I think it was very much a pro-growth and in that regard, a pro-business address.
So, Scott, what are all these guys complaining about that come on CNBC all the time about uncertainty, higher taxes, too much regulation? Why are corporate cash balances so high? Why aren't they hiring? Why is unemployment 8%? And why are we growing at sub 2% 4 years after the recovery supposedly started?
I guess all these business leaders, most of the folks we have in this program, just needs a community organizer to run their organizations for them because he knows how to run a business better than they do. Look, this country is less competitive today than when he came in. We have less people working than when he came into office. The fiscal trajectory for this country is in a worse position than when he came into office. So he has done nothing in actuality to try to fix the situation, but I'll give him the credit. He talks the right talks. He says the right things. This is not the first time that he says that he's going to pivot now and look to jobs in the economy. He said that in every State of the Union that he's given since I've been here, since he's been in office. But we know what the reality is. He just doesn't get it done for the economy.
What we'll get through the House, Congressman Garrett,
well, sure. A number of things. I mean, on the area that I do, I chair the Capital Markets Subcommittee. We're going to do a lot to try to get through the House, to try to provide some uncertainty, to try to peel back of what was done on Dodd-Frank so that there is certainty in this
But in the things he proposed last night, what can he do with executive orders, and what does he need you for?
Well, with this administration, he probably thinks that he can do just about anything with executive orders, because we have seen already that the courts have struck down a number of actions, such as the NLRB decision of recent. Hopefully the CFPB as well, they'll hopefully strike that down. He will try to do as much as he possibly can, whether it's constitutional or otherwise, with executive orders. We'll call him on that. But we'll extend that proverbial bipartisan hand across the aisle if he will actually work with us, if he actually will give us a plan on immigration, on making government more streamlined, on the fiscal situation. He just never comes to the table to us with anything detailed other than the rhetoric. CBO once said they cannot score a speech, and I'll be going to budget later on today. They can't score all the talking points that the president gives us.
Congressman Delaney, how far down the list of priorities was to make us competitive was a different type of corporate tax system that might make us more competitive? Did you hear much about that? Does it seem like something that you're going to see the president actually try to do over the next couple of months?
Well, I thought the first, quarter of his speech, he talked about corporate tax reform. And we clearly need comprehensive tax reform. I think we have 300 items of tax in this country, 200 items of deduction. It's not a sensible system. But I do think as it relates to competitiveness, I mean, the problem this country has is not that businesses aren't doing well. Businesses on a relative basis are actually doing very well right now. The problem is that we don't have enough Americans working. And the reason we don't have enough Americans working is because the economy has fundamentally changed. The effects of globalization and technology have profoundly affected the workforce and the face of jobs in this country. And what we really have to do in order to broaden the employment opportunities for more Americans, we have to make sure the country can compete. And the things we need to do to compete is we need a more educated workforce. The president talked about that. We need to change our immigration policies. The president talked about that. And we need a national energy policy, and the president talked about that. We also need to invest in our infrastructure, which the president discussed. And to do all these things, we need to put the country on a better fiscal trajectory. And the president also talked about that. So these are the kind of things. I mean, regulations are not affecting business, in my judgment, at this point. I mean, we talk a lot about Dodd-Frank, but we have to remember on the heels of the financial crisis, 19 of the 20 largest financial institutions in this country either failed or needed government support in one form or another. That's normally the context for financial reform. And we're dealing with financial reform right now. I don't believe Dodd-Frank is affecting anything in this economy right now.
Congressman, thank you.
Can we say that's the takeaway from the other side of the aisle? That regulations are not affecting business?
Right.
Unbelievable.
Well, I think Steny said yes.